Hi everyone, Harry here to talk about Supreme Court reform, which is in the next few days going to become a major campaign issue. We've had it reported in all the major outlets that Biden is going to come out of the box with some proposals to reform the Supreme Court to include perhaps a constitutional amendment. The big question or the big proposal might well be term limits. I say might well be because this all comes out of the work of a commission of 25 Supreme Court scholars that did their reported to him over a year ago, and this was their real focus. So let me first explain term limits just a little. What are the big problems with the Supreme Court besides the personnel? It's the total, no holds barred, blood on the floor, political battles over confirmation, and the fact that, and these two points are related, there's such a kind of crazy quilt pattern of confirmation so that some presidents, Carter, for example, get 0 appointees and some get these huge harvests. And if you kind of run the books for the last 30, 40 years, the constitution of the current Supreme Court, it's dramatic how many appointees have gone to Republican presidents. So what would a term limit do? It would say justices should serve 18 years. That's a pretty big chunk of a career, but no more, and then they would step down. And in theory, that would reduce the stakes of these lifetime appointments, especially when they put up, 40-year-olds, 43-year-olds, as Thomas was at the time. And it is normally coupled with a proposal that each president, and you can see how the 18-year term would work with this, you would cycle in and out, and each president would get probably per term 2 appointments. So you wouldn't have the incredible stakes that resulted, for example, in the 3 appointments by Trump and the dirty dealing with Merrick Garland and the overruling of Roe v. Wade. So Biden says his proposal is going to cover that. Now, it's suggested in the papers that it would be legislation. I don't think it can be legislation, and I think they must know it can't be legislation because a law cannot trump the Constitution, and the Constitution says clearly that Supreme Court justices serve for life tenure. That's the whole part of the design of the Constitution that we are now maybe seeing the better of. But you want them to have this full insulation, you give them life tenure, and that is what I think it would require to change to an 18-year term. Now, Biden is also talking about, so that's point one, the reform of tenure to make it term limits. I think it would need to be constitutional. 2 other things that may be part of the package. 1, an ethics code. And again, it might need to be constitutional because whatever's passed by statute, you can see the Supreme Court just striking down and saying, oh, thanks very much for your advice. We're the ones who decide it. But it would set up a sort of big battle, and it would just make it enforceable. Right now, scandalously, the court isn't bound by anything except their own kind of conscience with individual justices, and that's led to the extreme abuses with Thomas, the abuses with Alito. So that's the second thing. And the third thing that will be folded into these packages potentially is immunity. And here, again, it looks like some constitutional action would be required. If you read the Supreme Court's vastly overreaching and horrendous opinion, and that's a widespread view, not just mine. It really seems to be that they would say this is a constitutional decision, even though it's really sort of more based on their principles of what is good government, but that would be the third. Okay, so those would be the packages or the components of any kind of reform proposal. Maybe we'll talk about them more when they come out. But let's end with some observations about the politics of this. So this is, very much an election year move. You have the House in Republican hands and the Senate in a bare majority for the Democrats, but this is certainly the kind of proposal that you would have to beat the filibuster limit on. You'd have to get to 60 votes, meaning that Biden and the White House don't really believe that this is going to somehow pass between now and November. But it will continue to shine a light on what's been a pretty grievous situation, and it will continue to highlight the real unpopularity of the court. It's like, everyone, it's a race to the bottom between Trump, Biden, the Congress, and maybe at the bottom, the Supreme Court. So there's a lot to be said for in political grounds for focusing on the Supreme Court. But it's not simply that, because this would be, and I think Senators Whitehouse and Wyden, the ones who have been leading the charge, would see it as the first important strike in a longer battle. This is in some ways a bad or lamentable example, but the Equal Rights Amendment has been chugging along for many, many years, still hasn't received the 2/3 majority endorsement of the states, but it's a perennial issue. In a similar way, proposing constitutional amendment would be a critical issue that would play out in the states for years to come. Okay, but that's the big thing. So we've got first and foremost term limits to somehow do away with the total kind of convulsions of all these appointments, and especially the motivation or incentive for presidents to put in little kids. Shouldn't say little kids, but but put in, say, 40-year-olds or whatever. That'll be the number one thing. But the number two thing close behind will be ethics. Again, not necessarily because they can make that happen, though it's at least more arguable than, say, with term limits, which are right there in the Constitution. But it really puts the focus on what's been a total eyesore that so far the Supreme Court has somewhat high-handedly resisted all efforts to address, and then folded in there as the last issue will be immunity. So we'll also keep the spotlight on that. Okay, so proposals that all in all would require some kind of constitutional amendment. One might well be framed, and then there'd be a real debate. How do you want to do this? Do you want to have 18-year terms? Do you want to get rid of life tenure in some other way? Do you want to enlarge the court? The proposal from the Roosevelt days, and it was also on the table when these groups came together. We know one other little detail, which is that Biden, in the wake of the immunity opinion, consulted Dean of American Constitutional Law Lawrence Tribe, and then went through some of his proposals for reform that have been there's one in the Guardian newspaper after the immunity opinion saying, here's what we should do, talking about some of these reforms. There's been stuff in the New York Times. Anyway, Biden is taking Tribe as a kind of rabbi here, but all in by way of trying to get at eventually, but immediately keep the heat on in the political season, the Supreme Court's terrible decision-making, total absence of any kind of ethical constraints, and then the whole national complete crises we have every time there's a new appointment, which doesn't happen in other countries. It's very much a vestige of the American system, tried and true in the Constitution, but maybe not so tried and true. Maybe it's a feature that has served its purpose, and in our highly partisan political days would be good if it could yield. And that's the very final point, which is constitutional amendments, famously difficult to pass, take the longest amount of time, and even legislation now, where things stand with Republicans in the House and Senate, ain't nothing going to happen immediately, but it'll be an ongoing political issue, and that helps the Democrats because the Supreme Court is so associated with Republicans, and so unpopular. Talk to you later. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.